hopefully we've accomplished a few things. We've added good players to our team who are good peoples that we think are going to help build our program and continue to build our program out. I mean, I think that's really the priority and the focus.
That was Texans general manager Nick Caserio after his team added 9 new players to its roster via the draft, plus undrafted free agency has already started as the Houston Texans continue their rebuild and have a very productive weekend. Good evening, everybody. Welcome once again to the Fox 26 Sports Stream. As always, I'm Sal Manine, sports producer here at Fox 26. We do this every Monday night just after 7 o'clock. There's a variety of ways you can find us online and through social media. Go to our website, fox26houston.com. Go to our YouTube channel. Just search fox26houston.com in YouTube, and as always on our Facebook page. Again, just search for Fox 26 Houston. We're going to get into the draft and the newest members of the Texans, and we're not going to assign grades because obviously it's way too early to tell anything, but we'll get into what this class has, doesn't have, what's next for the Texans. We'll also check in on the Astros, who are just minutes away from first pitch. They are back home at Minute Maid Park all week long, and they have a very familiar face back in the lineup. Jose Altuve, activated off the injured list, back in his usual spot, leading off tonight in a very important series against the Seattle Mariners, one of the contenders to try to unseat the Astros in the AL West. So we'll keep an eye on that as things roll along. Again, first pitch still a couple minutes away, and of course we'll have the latest for you tonight on Fox 26 News at 9. But let's get into the draft and just what your Houston Texans did or did not do. Taking a look at their draft class, here's the first half of the latest members of the Houston Texans that are joining via the draft. The 3rd overall pick used on Derrick Stingley Jr., the corner out of LSU. In 2019, he was without question, as a true freshman, the single best defensive back in college football. Battled injuries, and obviously everybody had to deal with the COVID situation over the last 2 years, so didn't reach those same levels, but says he's healthy, and if the Texans get anything close to the 2019 version of Derrick Stingley Jr., it may not be long before this guy is one of the top cover corners in the entire NFL. The second first-round pick that the Texans used went to a hometown kid, a Atascocita's very own former Texas A&M offensive lineman. Kenyon Green can play multiple positions along the O-line, most likely going to be a guard for the Texans. And one of the big keys with Kenyon Green is not just that he is versatile, but he is very good in the run game, something which the Texans have struggled with for a few seasons now. Second round, again, staying local as the Texans take a kid just from down the road, Stafford alum and former Baylor star, the reigning Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, Jalen Petrie, a safety who can also line up at nickel, can get into the backfield, good against the run, can also play back deep if you have to go into passing downs. He's the Texans' selection in round 2, and then 2 picks in round 3. Both Nick Saban alums, both guys from Alabama. John Mechie III, who actually led the Crimson Tide this past season with 96 catches, tore his ACL in the SEC title game, but says that rehab is going ahead of schedule. And come July, he is a full go for any and all football activities. If he can be that same guy that he is at Bama, he's a guy who can slot in almost from day one for the Texans as their slot guy. And then Christian Harris, who is a wrecker all over the field at the linebacker, typically playing the will spot for the Texans. Fairly new to the position, did not come into Alabama as a linebacker, but quickly distinguished himself and is going to bring a lot of athleticism to the Texans linebacking core. Then from Saturday, the last few rounds of the draft, the Texans adding 4 more guys, headlined by Damian Pierce, a bowling ball out of Florida. If you want to talk about one word to describe the way that Damian Pierce runs, it would be violent. This is a guy who's not afraid of contact, has a little Maurice Jones-Drew in him, and that he's very tough to take down. He is not afraid to try to run through you, but also is able to get a little bit of separation and break off some of those 10, 15, 20-yard runs. Don't be surprised if by the end of the year he is not running back one for the Texans, if not by the end of training camp. Then defensive line, Thomas Booker, a former teammate of Davis Mills at Stanford. Tegan Quintoriano out of Oregon State, more a blocking tight end than a passing threat, but somebody who the Texans needed some depth and some help at the tight end position after losing some guys to free agent over the last few years. Most likely Brevin Jordan, Pharaoh Brown are going to be your guys that you look to get the ball to in the air, but Tegan Quintoriano is someone who General Manager Nick Caserio couldn't talk enough about his ability to line up on the line and block in versatile sets. And then another local kid rounds out the draft class, Austin Dekulus out of LSU, a Cy-Fair High School alum. Nobody started more games in an LSU jersey than Austin Dekulus, who, of course, left Death Valley with a national championship ring. So that is what the draft class looks like. Looks like a very solid class. I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, the Texans hit a home run or they completely bombed and failed and they wasted their picks. Obviously, there's no way to tell at this juncture, just 48 hours away from the end of the NFL draft, just what did or did not happen, or what kind of impact these guys are going to have. But if you're a Texans fan, you can at least look at it and go, there's a lot of guys there that played big-time football, that played a lot of football, and who you can see just based off the game tape that you have seen, what you do know about their measurables, that there's at least a core there around which the Texans are going to try to build. So now for the first time in a few years, you can say that the Houston Texans have an actual roadmap. Now, where is that map going to eventually lead? That remains to be seen over the next couple of seasons. But at least for right now, you can see this is the core that they're hoping to start something with. Then if they can find a quarterback, if they can coach these guys up and they continue to progress, perhaps this is the type of core that a couple of years from now, you're talking about the Texans are in the playoffs, or the Texans are now all of a sudden an attractive destination for potential veterans and other free agents out there. But at least you can see some type of plan as to where the Texans want to go and what they're trying to do. Let's hear some more from Nick Caserio on just that, and the fact that it's obviously way too early to try to project just how good or bad this class is or is not, and how he feels after his organization wrapped up its second draft under him, and really his first complete draft since he didn't have any first or second round picks a year ago. Here's Nick Caserio.
Not going to know if we quote unquote hit on these picks for a couple of years. So, I mean, look, the draft grades are meaningless. Like, I don't, whatever the big draft grades are tomorrow, like, okay, this team got an A, this guy got a B, like, based on what? Like, through what lens? I mean, these guys haven't played one snap of football. So, our urgency is there every day. Like, as we build a team, our urgency to get good players on the team, whether it's a guy that we draft, it's a guy that we work out as a free agent, it's a guy that we sign as a free agent, it's guys that we trade for. There's urgency every day. There's urgency in the NFL. So, I'd say there's no additional pressure to quote unquote hit on our picks. I don't even know what that means. Like, ultimately, the player's performance is going to dictate whether or not, like, he's a good player, he's not a good player. If it doesn't work out, okay, we'll move on from that player and we'll go find somebody else. Like, that's our job, and that mindset and that thought process is going to permeate our building for as long as I'm in charge.
So again, if you read anything that says, oh, team A definitely won the draft and teams B, C, and D get Fs or Ds for their draft performance, obviously far too early to tell in that regard. But if you're a Texans fan, you at least see some guys that you go, all right, these are football players. These are guys who you expect to come in and, in the case of many of them, most of them perhaps, be starters from day one, or at least be guys that are playing significant snaps as soon as the 2022 season gets underway. And that's certainly going to be the case for the two guys taken in the first round. Let's hear from Derrick Stingley Jr. and Kenyon Green, who already arrived in Houston and are excited to be playing for the Texans, starting just a matter of days as the offseason program is already underway.
They saw my true talent beyond everything else. So Whenever you're surrounded by people that know your true worth, it just makes you feel better as a person.
I was shocked. I was just truly just thanking God, for this opportunity, being here, being able to, stay home and play for my city. So I'm gonna give everything I got. I'm gonna be the best player, best person, you can ever, meet.
And obviously, Kenyon, one of several local products now on the Texans roster. Nick Casario, so that was more just coincidence than anything. It's not like they were circling guys in Houston saying we got to go after Houstonians or people who played high school football in the Houston region. Obviously, and I'm obviously biased as I say this, but Texas high school football is the best football in the country. And so Houston being the biggest city in the state, it would just go stand to reason that you're going to have a lot of players who played high school football in the city of Houston who end up getting drafted, whether it's by the Texans or someone else. And we saw that certainly this past weekend is there were a number of guys who grew up in the area who are now going to be receiving paychecks from the highest professional league in the world to play the game of football. All right, let's check in with one of those local products. Jalen Petrie, again, the reigning defensive player of the year in the Big 12, did a little bit of everything for Baylor, can line up at multiple spots in the defensive backfield. He was asked about that and what kind of versatility he brings to Lovie Smith's defense.
I plan on playing safety and nickel, but whatever Coach Lovie Smith feels comfortable putting me at, I'm going to try to be a guy that can play a lot of different positions and do a lot of different things. Like I said, I'm very thankful that, he believed in me and he picked me.
And Petrie's a guy who scored twice on the defensive side of things during his collegiate career. And so he's a little bit different than Derrick Stingley Jr. in that he's not just a lineup and lockdown coverage type of guy. He's good in the run game, as he alluded to. He can line up at the nickel position. Then Baylor even at times used him to rush the passer, to get into the backfield and create havoc. So expect to see him deployed in various different ways in the Texans secondary. All right, a couple more. We won't get into all the guys right now. As always, if you want to recap of everything that was going on this past weekend, just make sure you're following our sports director, Mark Berman, on Twitter. He's at Mark Berman, Fox 26. You can hear a little bit of everything from the guys who were drafted by the Texans. But here's what the two Alabama teammates in Tuscaloosa, now teammates again in Houston, had to say about their new team and the type of success they believe they can bring from Nick Saban to Lovie Smith.
I think we're still going to be at Houston a prolific offense, and it's just going to be the same thing. And I think I'll fit in however they need me, because I think I have a lot of versatility in my game, and however they need is just what I'm going to do.
I just think my versatility in general, especially being able to play that linebacker off the ball position, playing the wheel. They really allow the guys all the gaps to flow to him and all the plays to flow to him, and he has to be that most athletic guy that be able to play three downs, to be on the field for the run, for any pass plays, to be able to rush. And I just want to dominate in all three phases.
So you look specifically at the wide receiver and linebacking positions, and all of a sudden, almost overnight, the Texans have remade themselves in that regard. Now the Texans are trotting out a wide receiving core that goes Brandon Cooks, who you just signed to an extension, Nico Collins, who had a very strong finish to his rookie year. He's that big body, can go out there and be physical, get balls, high point them in the red zone, that type of guy. And then you contrast that with a John Mechie III, who, while still recovering from that ACL, when healthy, can be deployed in a variety of aspects, as we saw this past season with the Crimson Tide. He can split out wide and use his speed. He can play underneath and kind of fill that role that at times you were seeing Danny Amendola fill this past season for the Texans, and somebody who is used to playing big-time football against big-time competition in the SEC. So all of a sudden the Texans have a respectable wide receiver core that you're not just looking and going, the same time a year ago, you're going, all right, you got Brandon Cooks and then a whole lot of question marks, a whole lot of guys on prove-it deals, rookies like Nico Collins. not the case as the Texans head into 2022. Same with the linebacking core. We knew that that was a position of need for the Texans and one that they were going to have to address beyond Camus Grugier-Hill, who re-signed and is coming off arguably his best season as a pro. Now all of a sudden you get to line up an athletic freak at the will position who can do a little bit of everything. And so that was a pick. If you happen to check on social media, the Texans released a video after they made that pick of Lovie Smith absolutely going wild, giving a huge hug to Nick Caserio because the Texans traded up to get Christian Harris with that 75th pick, and you could see why if you're a defensive coach like Lovie Smith, you'd be excited about that. So 5 of the top 75 picks were made by the Houston Texans. Obviously a very big defensive flavor. There's not that obviously big marquee offensive name that typically draws a lot of the headlines, like when a team drafts a quarterback or a wide receiver, somebody like that who maybe the casual fan is used to just seeing those type of headlines. But there's a lot of plug and play pieces right from the get-go that could be the foundation for something special for the Texans. That again, in 2022, probably not going to win many more games than they did last year. But if they start progressing, just as this team looked a lot better on the field at the end of this past season than when the season began, and if that continues, and don't forget, they still got a ton of draft capital because of the Deshaun Watson trade. So if they can replicate this again in 2023, there's no reason that you're not talking next year or certainly 2024 as the Texans not being one of those teams that you go, look at them. That's a team that's going to make some noise in the playoffs, or that's a team that is all of a sudden on the come up. Remember, it wasn't that long ago that the LA Rams were the laughing stock and everybody was going, how bad could things be for LA and what do they have? And then all of a sudden they get Aaron Donald, they start to get some more pieces and they build that foundation till they get to the point where they're at now that they don't have to draft anymore. People want to just go play for them. Same thing with Tampa Bay, and you can go on down the list of teams that it's very rare that you can just overnight snap your fingers and go from cellar dweller to all of a sudden being a contender. And so that's why the Texans are hoping to take this long approach, and they certainly added a lot of talent to their roster over this past weekend. And again, they're still not done. Undrafted free agents are still going to be added in the coming days. The Texans, we know, already added Seth Green, tight end out of U of H, started his career at the University of Minnesota, one of several undrafted guys. They also signed a couple veteran pass rushers today, so we will have much more on that coming up for you tonight on Fox 26 News at 9. And they made a trade, trading away Lonnie Johnson Jr., who was one of their starting cornerbacks, to the Kansas City Chiefs. So we'll get into all of that tonight on Fox 26 News at 9. Before we wrap up our Texans talk, I do want to get one more in here from Nick Caserio. He was asked about the fact that this is a very SEC-heavy draft class. 6 of the 9 guys who the Texans drafted all played their football in what is, without question, the top conference in the collegiate ranks. Here's what Nick Caserio had to say about that.
The SEC, seem against good teams, but good football players are good football players. So whether they play in the SEC, whether they play in the ACC, whether they play in the Pac-12, whether they play in a Colonial, whether they play in the AAC, a good football player is a good football player. I think one thing that you have to be conscious of is evaluating that player and the competition that he's playing against. I mean, that's a fair part of the evaluation. Like, you can't totally discard that. So it's a part of it. Then you actually have to look at the player. Do the skills that he shows, regardless of level of competition, are those going to transfer over into our level? So you kind of have some ideas. Some players are able to make that transition better than others. But the reality is, okay, the SEC, their careers are over. Like, nobody cares about what they did now at LSU, Florida, wherever the hell they played. What people care about is what are you going to do when you're a Houston Texan? So what are you going to do with your opportunities? You're going to make the most of your opportunities. We're trying to create as much competition in here as possible, bring in good players, and the players are ultimately going to determine how big of a role they have on the team. We're not going to predetermine it. It doesn't matter what round he was drafted in. Like, in the end, you have to produce, you have to perform. If you do that, you're going to play. If you don't, like, somebody else is going to play. It's very simple.
And you could definitely tell from listening to Nick Caserio over the course of the weekend, that this is where he's comfortable. This is obviously, we know his background coming up through the scout ranks and then the years that he spent alongside Bill Belichick in the Patriots war room. So he's a guy who very much felt at ease and in control over the draft process. There's certainly plenty to criticize about decisions the Texans make or did not make in other aspects of running this organization, and certainly how the head coaching search has unfolded each of the past 2 years bears a lot of head scratching and question marks in regards to Nick Caserio. But when it comes just to scouting, evaluating talent, and maneuvering through the draft, you could tell that this is a guy who had a clear vision of what he wanted to get done. And so at least now, when you are looking a year, 2 years, 3 years from now down the road, and you really start to see what kind of impact these guys have, you can definitively say, all right, it worked or it didn't work in regards to Nick Caserio and his regime. There's something on which you can judge them, as opposed to before he got here, those last couple years where there wasn't really a general manager. Then there was Bill O'Brien. He was getting help from Jack Easterby. And it really put the Texans in this awkward position where I actually looked it up earlier. So with the trade of Lonnie Johnson today, you just look back at the most recent draft class that happened under Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby. And there's a whole lot of guys who are not on the Texans roster anymore. So you talk about that foundation that the Texans are trying to build now. That's part of the reason they're in the position they've been in the past 2 seasons. Is 2018, 2019, they didn't do the greatest job drafting from top to bottom. Even going back to the Rick Smith days, he would, for so long, what was it that we heard about Rick Smith? Good in the first round, but then when you get into that middle or later rounds, didn't always get the base knocks that you need to build that foundation, to fill out the 53-man roster. That, yes, you need playmakers. You certainly need a quarterback. You need difference makers, but there's 53 guys on the roster for a reason. And you build contenders through the draft, not just with saying, oh, well, look who we got in the first or second round, but being able to find those guys in rounds 3, 4, 5, and then even if it is a crapshoot once you get to 6 or 7. So again, Texans added 9 guys through the draft, signed a couple veteran pass rushers. We'll get into that for you tonight on Fox 26 News at 9. We'll also have much more on the Astros, including hearing from Jose Altuve as he returns to the lineup tonight. They are in the bottom of the first right now at Minute Maid. It is scoreless, 0-0. Jake Odorizzi coming off arguably his best performance in an Astros uniform. He's on the bump for the Stros. Marco Gonzalez toeing the rubber for Seattle as Yuli has just grounded out. So that wraps up the first inning. So scoreless heading into the second. So again, we'll have Stros, we'll have Texans for you tonight on Fox 26 News at 9. As always, for the most up-to-the-minute updates, scores, anything you want to know in the Houston sports scene, make sure you are following our sports director, Mark Berman. You can find him on Twitter. He is at Mark Berman, Fox 26. For all of us here at Fox 26, I'm Salmanine. We'll see you again next Monday, just after 7. This has been the Fox 26 Sports Stream. Thanks for watching.